I think there's this misnomer that mental health professionals are, all perfect, right? There is no perfect. There's no perfect, right? And so I think that there's a lot that, each counselor can do to just sort of illuminate this idea that therapy is really just a journey for us to become more fulfilled versions of ourselves, whoever we're meant to be,
All right. Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder of Heart and Solutions. So if you are listening in Iowa and you understand or realize that you need a counselor, definitely give us a call at Heart and Solutions. We are doing in-person telehealth and in school for the next couple of weeks, still, as well as the in-home behavioral health service for kids.
I'm Krista Brown. I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions. So I am in charge of that behavioral health for kids counseling service that Julie just mentioned. We go in home and work with kids on different behavioral skills, ages 4 to 18. We can also do telehealth right now as well in all of our locations throughout the state. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Yeah, so we post on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Central, and we are always advocating to batch up your tasks and do them once a week instead of spreading them out throughout the week. So Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Central, Krista and I will be putting away our clean laundry, putting away our outfits to decrease our decision fatigue for the week, putting together all of our outfits on Sunday night so that we have clean clothes for the week. And if you listen to us on Sunday night, you get the latest episode, and it gives you that entire week to either get scheduled with your counselor, to call and get set up with a new counselor, or to send us a message. If you're in a different state and we can't see you at Heart and Solutions, that's okay. Send us a message. We will find you a counselor to get set up in your zip code. So we are very, very excited today. We've got a very special guest from New York. We've got Dr. Renee Exelbert. Welcome, Renee. Thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So I'm going to brag on Dr. Renee Exelbert a little bit. Renee is a licensed psychologist and is the founder and the director of the Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change. So from that title, we know, gosh, she integrates that physical side of our health and our wellness with our mental health, our psychotherapy side of our wellness. So I just love this connection, this mind-body connection that we're going to get to talk about today. So the Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change, if you are in New York, you can look them up in Manhasset and in Nyack, New York. So if you are anywhere close to those locations, definitely reach out to the Metamorphosis Center for that fusion of psychotherapy and physical well-being and fitness. So Dr. Exelbert is also an adjunct professor for the Department of Applied Psychology at New York University at the Steinhardt School of Culture. So really, really cool there. And then we're really excited to hear about this. So there is a memoir that Dr. Exelbert has recently written and released. It's called Chemo Muscles. And this is, I'm so excited to hear about this, this memoir that's come out. So I'm going to let you, Dr. Renee, I'd love to hear more about what is Chemo Muscles and tell us about this memoir.
So Chemo Muscles, Lessons Learned from Being a Psycho-Oncologist and Cancer Patient. It journals my experience of working in a pediatric cancer center for 6 years as a psycho-oncologist. So I worked with children who were diagnosed with cancer and their families. So I was a psychologist there for 6 years, and I learned a whole bunch about how to help kids going through cancer, how to help their families. I learned a lot about coping techniques and psychological theory to support the wellness journey. And I also saw a lot of things on the healthcare side, how people and healthcare providers treat patients. And so I loved that work. And right when I decided to leave, I was diagnosed with my own cancer. So the doctor became the patient. So my memoir details my experience of having cancer in a very raw, vulnerable way. But it also talks a lot about coping techniques, ways for people with cancer to be empowered, friends and family, things that they often say that are helpful, things that aren't helpful, and ways that healthcare providers can better and more effectively help patients in general, how we can treat them with dignity, care, and respect.
Wow. Wow, what an interesting perspective you have, where you've been on both sides, where you've been a provider and you've helped families who've been diagnosed with cancer, and then you've gone through that process as a patient too.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that you experienced as you were going through as a patient? Did you have any changes in perspective?
I think one of the things that I confronted most powerfully was the sheer level of disempowerment that patients experience, and how, as healthcare providers, we have no idea how much we can impact somebody's journey. Really, just from getting to know them as a full person, not seeing them as a diagnosis, but seeing them as an individual with a diagnosis, which is also something that we obviously hope to do in the mental health fields as well, right? See them as a whole person, also pay close attention to our nonverbal language, right? We can say so much nonverbally that people are really picking up on, even in terms of relaying test results, right? Not returning calls, returning them in a timely manner when somebody is really anxious, the way that individuals can deal with somebody with a medical history. There's a lot of things that I learned. Some of them I saw as a healthcare provider, and some I didn't see until I was a patient. But both experiences really illuminated a lot of things that I think need further work in the future for patients in general.
Yeah, it sounds like even before you got your diagnosis, as you were working with families, you were seeing this disempowerment happening with families, with patients, and where there was it sounds like there was a lot of anxiety that you were picking up on and helping people through. And then some of the practices that you were seeing were just not empowering those families.
Right. And I don't think that it's even something that we can always control. I think that, when people are going through a trauma, by that very nature, they are, terribly frightened. They're waiting for answers. They feel in many ways that their fate and destiny lies in the healthcare provider's hands. And so they are picking up on the smallest level of information, because they're so desperate for some sense of power and control, that even when you walk into a room, when I used to walk into a child's room as a psychologist to play video games, parents would want to know what information I knew and, what I may be withholding. And so I saw, very clearly then a real level of disempowerment. And then I clearly experienced it as a patient when I, would watch literally the technician's face, when they were doing a biopsy, to just see like, what did they know? What were they not sharing?
It seems like there's kind of this sense, and I can definitely relate with this sense of like, well, my medical providers, are they telling me everything that I need? And also, are decisions being made for me or for my child without my input? And I think that is something that I think is natural that we would be aware of in any kind of health situation. So I think that things like just recognizing that is normal. So if I go into my doctor and I get any kind of procedure, or I get any kind of diagnosis, that it's natural that I'm going to have those thoughts or those concerns. Like I want to know everything.
Absolutely.
And part of getting any diagnosis is having to accept that there are so many unknowns.
Absolutely. And it's really contingent on, so many things are contingent on the way that the healthcare provider deals with us. When you're a patient, whether that be coming to someone for physical, medical, emotional services, you're often worried. If you're going for a medical procedure, there's a hierarchy, right, between provider and patient. Sometimes you have to wear a robe, you're very vulnerable, right? Sometimes you're ill, you're weak. And so, people are much more fragile. And the same goes for mental health. And we have to be really, really mindful of the experience of who's on the other end, and do all that we can to remember, the experience that someone's having, and try and in whatever way we can empower them. So not only did my experience as a patient dramatically help me in my work as a therapist, but I write about these things because I think that we all have a lot to learn in terms of how to treat other people with, the greatest level of care.
Yes. So when you were I just think it's so amazing that you took these two experiences that you had on totally different sides of provider and patient, and you were able to put them together into this memoir in a way that is really going to be helpful to so many people who are experiencing this, because there is sometimes a disconnect between provider and patient. And to be able to hear both sides of that, I think is so huge for somebody who maybe has just been diagnosed with cancer or with any kind of life-threatening diagnosis, or if their child has been. What a difficult situation. And knowing that somebody else has gone through that, being able to hear your experience of that and your interpretation of the care that you received, I think would be so beneficial for somebody, because again, there's so much unknown.
Yeah. And I think even beyond that, one of the things that's very clear in my book is that my memoir represents my journey, right? So once again, whether it's emotional well-being or physical well-being, the day that I started writing my book, I was in a very different psychological place than the day I finished my book. I had to go through so much identity change and so much growth and development on my own to be able to write the book. The book took me 7 years. And I wasn't writing for 7 years. I shelved the book for a long time because identity-wise, I wasn't really ready to put myself out there to the world in such a vulnerable way, psychologically and physically, right? And I ended up, when I was ready emotionally to take the book off of the shelf and finish it, I had a cancer recurrence. So I was like, oh gosh, I have all of these new chapters to write. But, it actually, it very much paralleled my emotional experience, because by the time I reached the end of the book, I think that it really demonstrates, certainly pertinent to this podcast, the power of our journeys, the power of growing, the power of figuring yourself out and becoming a new person, not a new person, but I named my center the Metamorphosis Center, right? So becoming, coming out of your cocoon and turning from a caterpillar into a butterfly and really taking flight. So that's what my book is about.
Absolutely. I love that. I feel like your story really just fits so well with this idea of metamorphosis, because in any kind of physical change, in any kind of mental health change, or just habit coping change, right? And in us learning who we are and learning what works for us and what doesn't work for us in our lives, we are always going through these changes, but we remain ourselves. There are pieces of ourselves that are still the same. A caterpillar and a butterfly are the same creature, but we go through these changes. And I love that, because it sounds like in your book we can really see just in all of the different ways that your identity just changed. Your understanding of who you are has changed.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I love that, because it shows us that change is possible. Change is possible.
100%.
And it's possible through even circumstances that we wouldn't ask for or that we wouldn't wish for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's also the beauty of therapy, right? For somebody to be on this journey of self-discovery and be able to see all of the things that, that lay within them, and all of the ways that they can, use their past, whether that be pain or strength, whatever, and really grow and become, a deeper, more fulfilled version of themselves.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So when you were working in oncology at the Children's Center, you were working there as the psychologist there on the floor?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. And so
Correct.
did you see, did you find that for a lot of people, this was their first time working with a psychologist, or did it seem like a mixed bag? What was your experience there?
I think that many people were just thrown into a whole bunch of trauma.
Yeah.
And so the way that my center worked was that therapy was just something that was sort of offered, and it was in a very benign way, and it was in a very non-confrontational, non-threatening way. It was literally like I would, knock on the door and introduce myself. Hey, I'm Renee, it was much more informal. It wasn't, my training is like much more boundaried and psychodynamic. Working with children who are chronically ill, doesn't lend itself to such severe boundaries. It's like you're playing video games. They're in their hospital gowns. You might be sitting there having McDonald's with them, and and then all of a sudden they get sick, right? And you have to leave the room, and and once again, like a real level of vulnerability and disempowerment. And so many people had never experienced therapy, and I think that one of the things it taught me is that there's a lot of ways to be in a therapeutic relationship. I would walk with some of the siblings of these kids, and they didn't want to be in therapy, right? So we would walk from the cancer center down the street and go sit under a tree and have chocolate milk, right? But like the conversations that we would have in that maybe 30 minutes was really therapeutic. But it wasn't necessarily coming to a psychotherapy office and sitting there and talking about your feelings. It was much more casual. And so coming from a much more psychodynamic, program, it also it taught me that there are lots of ways that we can practice. And since then I do practice in many ways out of the box. And even the idea of integrating exercise with psychotherapy is definitely something that's less formalized, and not traditional psychotherapy, but super cool and super helpful, and I have found to be like really, really powerful for people.
Yeah, I love that because I could see so many families, maybe you have young children and then this happens where your child gets a diagnosis. Now they're in the hospital, you're living in the hospital basically. And that change, being maybe the first time that they've experienced a counselor of any kind, there's so much stigma around counseling and that very structured, come to my office, come sit in the chair and talk to me kind of approach that is very useful, but in a situation like this where people they're in survival mode, these families are fighting to survive. And so I love this idea that this could be their first interaction with a counselor, and for that to be so specific to what they needed in that moment is a wonderful representation of counseling in general. Opens the door for the next time that they maybe need a counselor and have that open experience of, well, I saw that one counselor at the hospital and that was okay. Right?
That's
so
right.
And
that's very important. That's very important, right? I always teach that to my students. They're getting their master's degrees to become licensed mental health counselors. And I always say, like, if this is somebody's first experience, like even if they come to you once, right, and and they have a decent experience, you have now set the stage for a future relationship that could be really beneficial. And it might not be with you, and it might not be for 5 years from now, but they have in their brain that it's not so terrible.
Yes. Right? I love it's the Metamorphosis Center makes me also think about butterfly effect, right? And so for our listeners, if you're on the fence about counseling, just this idea that, that first counselor you meet might be a counselor, a psychologist at a hospital, right? When you're not actively looking to see a counselor. If you have that experience, then what a great way to open that door for future counseling. And the fact that counseling can look so many different ways. I love this example of going for a walk and drinking chocolate milk outside, because that's so therapeutically appropriate for that situation. But I think that, the general public, I always think like, gosh, if I wasn't in this field, what would I think about counselors? And what would I think about counseling? It's not great. So I love this imagery of just being able to be in a hospital room with somebody and eat McDonald's or play video games or read a bedtime story. I just think it's wonderful because we are even if we're doing traditional psychotherapy and we're going into somebody's office and we're sitting down, we're in a vulnerable place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do think when you say, when you just said, like, you don't know necessarily if you would think highly of, counseling, right? I think some of that is the way that therapy is portrayed sometimes in the media. And I also think that, it's really important for mental health professionals to, I try really hard to show the people who come to see me that I'm not perfect either, right? Like, this is life. Like, we're all on a continuum. We're all trying to, just become the best version of ourselves, right? And I think that the more that we can put that out there, that like, I think there's this misnomer that mental health professionals are, all perfect, right? There is no perfect. There's no perfect, right? And so I think that there's a lot that, each counselor can do to just sort of, illuminate this idea that, like, therapy is really just a journey for us to become more fulfilled versions of ourselves, whoever we're meant to be,
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It reminds me of, gosh, when I was 5, I used to say to my mom, I don't know which boy in my class I'm going to marry. Okay. And my mom would be like, you don't know who, like, you haven't met him yet, probably. Right. But it reminds me of this idea, because we're able to say, gosh, I don't know who I'm going to be in 10 years. I don't know who I'm going to be in 20 years, and that's okay. That's great. And I love this idea that no counselors are perfect, because they wouldn't have let me through school then if I had to be,
but
right?
There is no perfect.
None of us would be.
There is no perfect.
We couldn't be.
Yeah.
There is no perfect. Like, we're all just different, right? And so, even being able to give somebody psychoeducation, right? That there is no perfect, that it's not about meeting somebody else's idea of what they think you should be, that, our jobs as human beings is to just figure out what makes us tick, what makes us happy, right? Like, what, how do we want to exist in the world, right? And so as therapists, our job is to just help people figure that out for themselves, right? Not what their mother wants, not what their father wants, not what their boss wants, right? But like, what makes them happy? What lights them up inside? What makes them who they are, right? And so sometimes, that's a really important thing when people say, like, why should I see a therapist, right? It's like, I can talk to my mother, or I can talk to my friends about this. I don't need to pay somebody, right? But like, many times when you're talking to your mother or your friend, right, you're getting their version of who they think you should be, right? To no fault of their own, but they're seeing the world through their lens, right? And so our job in therapy is to help the clients see their life through their lens, right? To figure out what their lens is, right? How it differs from maybe how it is different from their parents or their friend or their boss or whomever.
I love that. So tell us more about this, because you are also a bodybuilder, right? So you've got this whole
bodybuilder. I don't know. I just had like a Twinkie yesterday, so I don't know how much of a bodybuilder I am today.
Are bodybuilders allowed to have Twinkies? I feel like they probably are.
Bodybuilders are definitely allowed to have Twinkies. The more the merrier. So I am a personal trainer, and I became a personal trainer really as I was healing from my first cancer. I was, when you have cancer, you feel completely disconnected from your body. And in many ways, you feel like your body betrayed you. It's like I didn't feel sick, right? I didn't look sick. And my doctor's like, no, you are, right? You are sick. And so for me, exercise and nutrition was a really powerful way to sort of get back in sync with my body. And so I was always into exercise. I always loved to dance. I always ate relatively healthy, but I was a sugar addict. Like I would inject Laffy Taffy like nobody's business. And so I just started becoming much more involved in nutrition. I started researching foods that were known to be inflammatory, or foods that, were known to grow tumors. Then I started researching food that we knew were anti-inflammatory or, helped shrink tumors. And so I really started changing the way I ate, and I started exercising much more significantly. And I loved the way that I could tell my body, eat sweet potatoes and egg whites and do this number of, reps, and your body's going to follow in this way. It's going to look this way, and it's going to grow muscles this way. And, I would tell my body something and it would listen. And so I loved that. And I started working with a personal trainer, and I got really into it. And she happened to be a professional bodybuilder, right? And she would, do competitions. And so all these people started coming over to me saying, "Are you training to do a competition?" And I'm like, "What is this? What is this competition?" And so my coach, she told me what she does. And I'm like, "There's no way in the world that you will ever see me standing on stage in a bikini and stripper heels and flexing my muscles. It will never, ever happen." And I started getting more and more into it, and more people started saying, "Are you competing to do a show?" And it was around the time of my 4 years out of having had cancer that I started thinking, you know what? It might be kind of cool to commemorate my 5-year anniversary out of having had cancer by doing a show. And so I asked my trainer, I'm like, what's involved? Okay, tell me about the stripper heels. What do I have to do?
Where do I get them?
And where do I get the stripper heels? And, and so it was really, I was already really so focused and living that life that it was really just about like really tweaking things and making my diet, even more regimented. And on my 5th year anniversary, right around the exact same time, actually, I did my first competition. And it was a very beautiful, empowering experience. I never would have thought ever that it would have been something that I did, but I actually found it extremely empowering. And I actually won in my division, my first show, which was super cool. And I did one more show a couple of years later. And, it's been a few years since I've actually competed. As you get older, it gets a little bit harder to make your body do certain things, but I would like to do another competition, but in the interim, I actually became a personal trainer. And then I started integrating psychotherapy and exercise. I came up with this idea because I was already a psychologist, and I had many people coming to me for therapy, many middle-aged women who were depressed, or, adolescents who were being bullied. And I would find myself talking to them about the merits of exercise and how empowering it was and why they should do it, and gives our brain serotonin, which helps reduce anxiety and depression and helps us, like a host of, only proven thing to combat dementia, like so many benefits. And I realized that I was talking about it so much, but I wasn't legally allowed to be doing like squats with them. Right. And so I ended up becoming a personal trainer. And then I opened this center, the Metamorphosis Center for Psychological and Physical Change, which name is obviously very significant to me personally. And so I have this crazy setup. First of all, my office was previously owned by 2 interior decorators. So they had their way with the paint. I have hot pink and turquoise crazy walls and chandeliers and butterflies and sunflowers all over my office. It's a funky, eclectic space. And half of my office is a gym, a little gym, but I've got my dumbbells and my bench press and my TRX. And then the other half is stodgy psychotherapy with my mahogany desk and my diplomas. And, and so I offer it as a service. If somebody wants to integrate the two, it's available. And, it also depends on the individual person, what we're working on. And if I think it could be helpful, or if they think it could be helpful. And it's a beautiful compilation of two of my passions. And I think that mind body is so important. I don't think that we can look at emotions without understanding physicality, and vice versa. I don't think we can look at our bodies without understanding how illness and our physical state of being is, can be very much impacting our emotional experience. So I think that really understanding, the interplay is so critical. And I incorporate a lot of visual imagery. So for instance, I may be working with a kid who's being bullied, and I may have him or her, close their eyes and envision this superhero or a stronger version of themselves, right? And at the same time, they'll be doing bicep curls, and we'll maybe even talk about, we'll even say mantras out loud, like I am bringing strength to myself, and I am, infusing my body with strength. And it's a very powerful experience. And I believe in it wholeheartedly. It was something that I utilized in my journey with cancer, and it's something that I use with my own clients. And I just think that it's so unique and special.
This idea of losing trust in your body, this is huge. It kind of blew my mind when you said that. So I just want to go back to it because, wow. Okay. So when you got your diagnosis, it felt like, okay, I felt fine. Like every message I was getting from my body was like, everything's normal. And then it felt like a betrayal. And so trust was broken there. And I love this idea that you can intentionally build that trust back, that you acknowledge that trust was broken, and that you intentionally set out to build that trust back between your mind and your body.
This is a very powerful thing in therapy as well, right? We know that resilience is a mental muscle. Resilience isn't something that you're born with. Resilience is a muscle that you can build. And so many of the clients with whom we work have experienced trauma, or, early abandonment, or, many early issues. And so it's the same metaphor. Sometimes they don't even know, right, that what they have experienced was damaging or traumatic, right? I've actually worked with children who have experienced physical abuse, and some of them have absolutely no idea that that's not the way it is in every home. Like they don't realize that their friends don't get hit. Like some of them have no idea, right? So it's the same thing for emotional. It's like realizing, wait, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. And how do I get it fixed? How do I change it? How do I get in control of a situation that, might not have been the way it's supposed to be, right? And so it's like teaching the person to find that inner strength and figure out ways where they can, become more empowered, right? And when we're working with children, obviously it's harder because sometimes, they don't have so much control. They're in homes where they may, not have so much choice, but we do what we can to teach people to access their inner resources and figure out ways that they can, rebuild or grow or,
Absolutely. I mean, it is very similar with, learning to trust our thought processes, or learning which thought processes that we naturally have that maybe we don't want to trust it. And same thing with our bodies, right? So there are certain, there's naturally what I would grab out of a buffet of food. And so learning that okay, that's my natural tendency. And maybe I don't trust that one so much, right? That natural choice that I would make, because if I'm at a buffet, I'm not going to the salad bar. That's not my natural place I would go.
That's right.
I'm going to the mozzarella sticks. That's where I'm going naturally, right? So
I'm with you.
Yeah, just being able to, and it's bringing to the physical side of things what we are talking about in therapy. So in therapy, we're going, okay, I accept about myself, Julie Johnson, that if I don't have stuff written down, I will never remember it. Right. Or that when something happens in my life where I feel like somebody is leaving me, that I get triggered by that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I know that about myself. I acknowledge that like I get mad at that person for no reason. Right. And so then I go, okay, I know that is what I do. That's my natural tendency because of my life experiences. And then I go, okay, I have a choice about that. I have a choice to make. Do I go with what I naturally would do, or do I make a different choice? And I think the same thing, I love this parallel with our physical body and our physical health, because we can say now, yeah, you can't control if you get cancer. Like, that's not something you have control over. But in terms of reconnecting, rebuilding trust in your body, that is something you have control over and that you can take intentional action over. And I love that because, left to my natural devices, I'm going to sit on the couch all day long. Like, there's 0% chance left to my natural devices that I'm going to work out at 5 a.m. Like 0%. However, I do it every morning because I know that that's my natural tendency. I accept that, but there are things that I can do so that I will work out every morning at 5 a.m.
Absolutely.
And I love that, building that trust in ourselves. And that's
the power of therapy. It's the power of therapy, and to teach people resources about themselves that they didn't even know that they had, right? Or to teach people, things that they could do, right? That, we are all right. We're all in control of. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control our response to it. And so to even teach people how to, the psychoeducation, right? Like how to be able to control the things that happen to you, right? There are techniques, right? And so that's a pretty cool thing, you know?
What are some of the most common coping techniques that you would use when you were working in oncology? What were the most common ones that you brought to people?
Yeah. So a lot of these are actually in my book.
Great.
One of the things that I talk about is the power of nutrition and exercise, right? Because like by controlling what we put into our bodies, we're taking an active role in our health, right? Exercise, we can literally be diminishing anxiety and depression, and having a sense of empowerment over our environment, right? So those are two really important ones. The average human being thinks of 60,000 thoughts per day, right? So we have like this incredible power in our mind to literally, go anywhere we want to go in our brain, right? And so I think number one, visual imagery is really, really critical. Seeing in our brain the thing that we want to happen and focusing on it, right? Like whether that be a test that you're about to take the next morning, right? I have a daughter who, she'll say, oh, I'm going to bomb my AP exam tomorrow, right? And of course, when your mom's a psychologist, the response is, if you say you're going to bomb your AP exam, then you are going to bomb your AP exam, right? So like, right? And so what do I say? Before you go to bed, close your eyes and see yourself rocking that exam, right? See yourself rocking it. Just visualize it, right? So the visual imagery is really powerful. And there are thousands of studies specifically with cancer patients. There was this study in the 1970s, this amazing researcher, Carl Simonton, and he researched how when patients envisioned a Pac-Man eating away at their cancer cells, their tumors showed a dramatic reduction in their size. And so that's really critical. And as a patient who had cancer myself, I came up with my own visual imagery, and I thought about it every night. My imagery was sunflowers. And the reason I came up with sunflowers was because I wanted to come up with something that was sort of, I saw as like tough and strong and could really withstand any storm. And sunflowers for me were that. They always sort of lean towards the sun, and they always lean towards hope. But they also like grow like these crazy things. And I just felt like they could withstand any storm. And so I focused on seeing sunflowers all of the time through chemo, through radiation. And I surrounded myself with sunflowers, real sunflowers, sunflower paraphernalia. I signed my emails with sunflower emojis. I still do that. So that was really important. Humor, really important. Whether I'm working with people now or when I was a patient myself, you know, when I went through radiation, I came up with a radiation playlist. And, you know, every day I was getting radiation. I would go into the technicians and I would add a new song each day for my radiation playlist. And, you know, and I'd walk in and I would sing with them like some crazy song about, you know, like radioactive or this girl's on fire or goodness gracious, great balls of fire. I had a whole, and each time I'd go in, this is what I would do. Was I feeling incredibly joyful each time I went to radiation? No, you know, but when you put your brain in that space, you know, you can create a different feeling. You can create a different connection with the technicians. So there's to answer your question, so many, I can go on and on about coping mechanisms. There are many. And I detail a lot of them in my book. But I just think that human beings have a tremendous capacity to thrive and be resilient. And I also think that we're malleable. And, you know, I think that therapy in general shows people that they have that capacity. You know, we can show people ways that they can grow, and we can also reflect back to them the difficult situations that they've been through in the past that they may not have even realized that they got through. And that those are the same skills that they can take to, you know, use to get through this next difficult journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I mean, being able to see the time frame in your book can help other people to reflect back on those times for themselves. They're not going to have the same experience. They're not going to have the same identity shifts throughout, but they are going to experience changes in themselves and being able to say, hey, I see these changes in Renee. I had some changes as well as I went through. This is what I learned from this is amazing. So I love that you, I mean, that could not have been an easy process, and 7 years to this memoir, right? And going through all of that, but being able to come out the other side with this understanding of what people need, and this offering of this memoir to be able to help somebody who is going through this for the first time to know that change is possible, to know that these outcomes are possible, and to learn these coping skills that you learned throughout that 7-year process. Absolutely. Is amazingly helpful.
And not just for patients, for their friends and family, because there's so many people who want to be helpful.
Yeah.
But they just don't know how. And they often say things that are not the right things to say. And it's not out of a lack of love. It's really just because they don't know better, or sometimes they're afraid, you know. And so I talk about a lot of things that people can do to, you know, more effectively help, and healthcare providers too. That's a big one.
Yeah. I love that. So I am definitely going to be ordering one of these books. So how do we order this book, or how do we get to read this?
It's on Amazon, and it's you know, it's lessons learned from chemo muscles. Now you fully understand the title, Chemo Muscles: Lessons Learned from Being a Psycho-Oncologist and Cancer Patient.
Wonderful. So available on Amazon. And then for listeners who are in New York, who live near Manhasset or Nyack, New York, how do they get in touch with you to get signed up for services at the Metamorphosis Center?
My website is drexelbert.com. This is a tough one. drexelbert.com. drexelbert.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all that cool stuff.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story.
Thank you.
We look forward to reading more in Chemo Muscles and getting to learn from that.
I'm Dr. Renee Exelbert, and I need a counselor.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story. It's been so educational for us as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. So if you are in New York, definitely get in touch with the Metamorphosis Center. If you are in Iowa, get in touch with Heart and Solutions, 800-531-4236. If you're in a different state, send us a message on Facebook Messenger at You Need a Counselor Podcast or on Instagram, DM at You Need a Counselor Podcast. Send us a message if you're in a different state. Send us your zip code, and we will send you some people to connect with, some counselors to connect with in your area as well.
Like Julie mentioned at the beginning, we post every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Central. So save up your laundry from the week, put that away while you listen to our new episode, and we can help you get ready to call a counselor that week to get set up with services as well.
Absolutely. If you've got questions for Dr. Renee Exelbert as well, we'd love to have her on the show again to answer those questions that you guys might have. So go ahead and send those to us as well on Facebook or on Instagram.
I'm Crystal Brown.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Bye.